It was just after dark in 2008, and I think it was July. My nephew and I had spent the day swimming at the stream just at the edge of the campground that backed up next to the river here in the Ozarks. About half an hour before dark, we decided to start fishing. We fished in peace with the noise of the campground behind us for about an hour or so, and by the time all the daylight faded and night took over, I was finally starting to get some nibbles from the fish. I had my swim trunks still on, so I decided to wade across the shallow stream. I had an LED headlight that could change to 3 different colors. I had the white light on as I crossed the stream, and I found a little sandbar to stand about knee-deep in the water. I was about 25 feet from the far side of the riverbank, which was nothing but thick forest and a steep hillside. I settled into my little spot, and I flipped my headlight to the red LED light, and I cast my line into the water near some logs I had noticed on the other side of the riverbank. As soon as my bait hit the water, with no warning at all, something smacked the water 3 feet in front of me. It could have been closer, so close that I felt a hard thud on the river bottom with my feet. And I turned my head to look back at my nephew, only to see him drop his pole and start running back to his mother at the campsite. I snapped my head back toward the direction from whatever this thing was had come from. "Hey!" I shouted into the trees, and I flipped my headlight onto the bright white setting and grabbed my handheld flashlight stashed in my front pocket of my swim trunks and drowned the trees with light, trying to get a glimpse of what had thrown such a heavy object at me. I was scanning the woods and was overcome with the distinct feeling that I was very vulnerable, that I was being watched, and I decided that I didn't want to stand there alone any longer. And I have to say that has never happened to me, and I grew up in St. Louis. It can be a violent city to live in, and I was kind of a rough kid. I never backed down from a confrontation, so I quickly waded back across the riverbank, making sure not to turn my back on the direction I thought it had come from. Later that night, we heard a pack of wolves tear through the night with their howls. It was close enough to make your skin crawl. Then we heard the coyotes, and I mean we heard tons of them, and it sounded like they were following the wolves. I mention this because I have heard people discuss that wolves follow Bigfoots and coyotes follow wolves. All I know is that I have camped all over these Missouri woods. There are some spots down here in these Ozark Hills that seem mysterious as all get out, and there's no telling what's yet to be found. We all have those friends that we would be better off without, and my friend Charlie was that friend. To be fair, I was that friend to him too. The adrenaline rush and excitement that we brought to each other's lives were too fun to resist. We were usually in trouble one way or the other when we were together. In fact, after some of the hot water we got ourselves into, it's a miracle that I'm still on this side of the grass. We were best friends for almost 30 years. Our favorite pastimes were fishing, hunting, and shooting anything from bows and arrows to guns to homemade spud launchers, which made great mortars for boats on a lake. We used giant slingshots to launch water balloons at water skiers, and we put open cans of cat food in the cars of people we did not like. Man, that is one of the foulest odors to ever get sucked into a person's nose, especially on a hot summer day. We loved turkey and deer hunting, and Charlie's mother and stepfather owned 60 acres in Kentucky, and we got to use that land. And on top of that, we had permission to hunt almost all the properties surrounding that farm, which was almost 2,000 acres. We both had 3-wheelers to start with, but later in life we graduated to quads. Those Honda 250s were awesome to play on. There was one farm we were prohibited from hunting. It was the Sherman farm. It was on the other side of the highway, but Charlie had a different take on that property, as it once belonged to his grandfather. And when the government cut the highway through the county, they divided his grandfather's farm, which resulted in 2/3 of the property becoming inaccessible. In order to access it, his grandfather needed to cross the land of the Sherman family, but Sherman Sr. would not allow it. Well, it didn't take long before Charlie's grandfather started to struggle, and soon after that he had to sell his land to the Shermans, the family who cut him off from his own property. He was offered 10 cents on the dollar, but not having any other options, he took the deal just to survive. In turn, some 20-plus years later, along came two yahoos, as Charlie and I were often called, running carefree all over the county. And as you can probably guess, we did not respect the boundaries of the Sherman family farm. We discovered that we could ride our Honda 250 three-wheelers under the highway through a drain culvert and pop out on the creek on the other side, giving us a route into 200 acres of some of the most adrenaline-filled off-road trails we could find. The property also held a good population of bucks and gobblers, but when we hunted that farm, we would cross the highway by foot right over the top so our rides wouldn't be found. It was during turkey season, and we had already hunted quite a bit that week, and we decided to sneak into the Sherman family's land anyway to fill up a couple of bread bags with some spike mushrooms and others that grew over on that side a lot better than around Charlie's mom's place. And while we were there, we decided that we would try to call in a tom or two with some words of love from our turkey callers. The next morning, we snuck over the highway and into the woods. Almost like clockwork, the gobbling started. But the bad thing was that the gobblers were on the other ridge and we had to cross an open bottom to get there. We slipped into ninja mode and got our outlaw butts into gear and ran over to where the birds were calling. And by the time we got there, everything was quiet. We knew we had to get them worked up and excited, so we put out 3 decoys on an old logging road and we hunkered down against a couple of trees. We slipped a couple of callers into our mouths and fired up some love songs and promised those toms the time of their lives. But the reply was not what we expected. A couple of seconds after we finished our calls, 6 bullets flew right past our heads. Charlie and I looked at each other with wide eyes and pale faces and sat as still as we could, letting our camo do its job and not wanting to give away our position. We were turkey hunters and woodsmen, and I cannot tell you how many times I have called other hunters to me and had them within arm's reach before I said something to them, just to scare them into learning a lesson about the difference between a real gobble and a turkey caller. But this time was different, though. This was about survival. I looked over at Charlie, and I wondered if we should make ourselves known, when from behind us and about half the distance as before, came 6 more shots. They whizzed past our heads again and sent us both to our feet, tearing down the old logging road. And we ran as hard as we could go, and we got around the ridge and we stopped to catch our breath. But whoever it was caught up to us in no time and sent 6 more shots flying right past us. We were off again running for our lives. The highway was only 150 yards away, and if we reached it, we would be home free. But as we ran, we looked to our left and saw an old man dashing between the trees. He was keeping up with us. We knew it must have been the Sherman Sr. and that he would cut us down if he got the chance. With a last-ditch effort, we tore down the ridge and right up to the fence and over to a large drop-off alongside the highway. We had never come out of that area before, but 6 more shots rang out from behind us, and we didn't get a chance to even think about it. And so we took a leap of faith and we jumped, and we slid down that rock cliff on our asses right to the shoulder of the highway. And without so much as looking for oncoming traffic, we ran across all 4 lanes to the concrete runoff that ran next to the porch of Charlie's mom's farmhouse. We told her what happened, assuming that Sherman Sr. had probably already called the sheriff on us and expecting him to roll up any minute, and we begged her to say that we had been sitting on the porch all morning with her, but instead she tilted her head and she looked confused. "You ought to go talk to the fella who was just here. He left just a minute ago," she said. "What do you mean? Who was it?" Charlie asked. "It was Sherman Jr.," she said matter-of-factly. he came to talk to me. Well, our hearts fell out of our chests. We knew we were in for it, thinking that he wanted to confront us about our trespassing. But Charlie's mom said that the man was running for office and he had come by to try to earn her vote. She told him that she could not vote for a man whose family wouldn't even allow her son to hunt their property. In return, Sherman Jr. looked at Charlie's mother in the eye and apologized for his father's stubbornness. He said that since the farm was now his, we would be happily given permission, written permission, to hunt the property. And Charlie's mother asked him if something happened to Sherman Sr., and Jr. replied that he had passed on just a week ago. And then she handed us a piece of paper with the written permission to hunt the land we had just been chased off of. Charlie and I looked at each other. Neither of us wanted to say it out loud, but we were both thinking it. The ghost of Sherman Sr. ran us off his property. Since that day, Charlie and I only ventured over the highway a few more times. There were never many birds to speak of over there, and the mushrooms had all vanished. The Shermans pushed dead trees and brush up along the creek to keep the ATVs out of the property, and we stopped sneaking over there and instead hunted birds on our side of the line. And I must conclude that, ultimately, Sherman Sr.'s ghost won in the end. I guess the reputation of the two Yahoos was so bad that even in death, that old crow didn't want us out there. Something happened on a fishing weekend that I went on with two of my friends that we have never been able to explain. We were camping in the woods along the San Jacinto River at a place my friend Bobby C. called Van Lakes. It was a property owned by Louis Berger that was pretty creepy at night. It reminded me of a Louisiana swamp with birds and cypress knees, and black water and unidentified noises. That was the first thing that set us on edge. It was an unidentified tree knocking somewhere in the woods. There would be 2 or 3 knocks, then there'd be a long pause, and there'd be 3 more knocks. "Nobody lives out here," Bobby said ominously. "I don't know who could be doing that." By the end of the day, we were running out of bait, and we were a 20-minute drive from the closest bait store. "Me and Joe will take the truck and go for more bait," Bobby said. "We should be back in 45 minutes or so." It was my job to stay and keep fishing. We had 7 poles out, so it was going to be a big job. 10 minutes after they left, it got quiet. I didn't mean and things quiet down and got peaceful. It got so quiet I could hear my own heart beating. And it stayed so quiet that my heart went from beating to pounding, and then the hairs began to stand up on the back of my neck. And then I heard something moving in the woods around me, and I told myself it was Bobby messing with me. They probably set the whole thing up. That's what I figured. They'd pretend to go off and buy more bait so they could jump out of the woods and scare me, and I figured I'd get them before they got me. I moved out a little ways as quietly as I could. Hidden as I was in the shadows of the trees, they wouldn't have been able to see me. And I stopped and stood there for a minute, and I listened. I was barely allowing myself to breathe at this point, trying to figure out where they were hiding and how they were going to jump out at me. And then I began to hear something up in the trees moving around. I could tell it was big, but I couldn't quite pinpoint where it was at, and I couldn't see a thing. And at that moment, one of the fishing poles got hit, so I eased back over to it and I reeled it in. There was nothing on the line, but as I stood there baiting the hook, I noticed that everything went back to normal. All the normal sounds of the night were back, and I was thinking to myself, what the heck? While simultaneously breathing a sigh of relief. So whatever it was gone, and I was just getting comfortable with the idea when it all went quiet again. That was enough to get me moving, and I started reeling in the lines as quickly as I could and gathering up the poles. I wanted out of there so badly that I didn't even notice when the normal sounds came back again. I was picking up the last pole when Bobby and Joe came walking back up and started asking why I had stopped fishing, so I told them why. About the time that Bobby started telling me that there was nothing in these woods to be afraid of, it got quiet again. We all felt it, Our heads were spinning as we all looked in every direction, trying to figure out what kind of predator was out there scaring nature into silence. Now, Joe, who was a natural-born chicken, was the first one to start insisting that we all get the heck out of there. I was in total agreement with him. Something was out there, and every sense I had was telling me that I didn't want to meet it. Bobby wasn't convinced until we heard what sounded like a big tree being pushed over. Now, trees get old and they do fall, but generally the falling part doesn't happen until the wind blows, but there wasn't any wind. There was just this long creaking, sighing sound of breaking wood, and then it fell over with a crash. Well, that was the last straw, and we all broke and ran, leaving our poles behind. The truck was 100 yards away, and we climbed over each other, getting in and screaming, "Go, go, 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 go!" And the tires rooster-tailed dirt and gravel behind us as we fishtailed into motion. No one said another word until we got back to the main road, and Bobby and Joe wanted to know more about what happened while they were gone. So I repeated my story, and I tried to add any details that I might have missed earlier. And then I asked them flat out if it was them messing with me. Of course, both of them denied it. Would they have left their poles behind if it was all a joke? A couple of days later, when the sun was shining, Bobby and I went back to get those poles. Old Joe didn't go with us. It's been 45 years since that day. We've never told our story to anyone. After listening to your channel for a while, I've started to think that we dodged a bullet that night. Now, I didn't see what it was, none of us did, but these days, I'm kind of glad that I didn't see it. I grew up in Maryland. Now, I'm not a great storyteller, but there were a couple of things that happened in my past that took me from skeptic to believer, and I'd like to share them with you now. The closets in my bedroom had louvered doors. That wall was opposite of my bed at the foot, so I faced them when I laid there at night. It wasn't until I was 16 that I noticed anything strange about them. It all started one night just out of the blue. I began to feel like I was being watched through the slats in those doors. I'd be lying in bed reading or listening to music, and the hairs would stand up on the back of my neck. That sense you get when you know someone's watching you, it would wash over me, and I would find myself wanting to turn and look at the doors. In my head, I would argue with myself that no one was there. How could anyone be there? But that feeling would not go away. Sometimes it would be so strong that I couldn't even force myself to look at those doors. This went on for several nights, and I finally got some posters and I hung them over the louvered part of the doors. I thought the problem was solved, but I wish it had been that simple. Right after I covered the doors and the posters, I began to wake up each morning to find them open. They weren't standing wide open, they were just cracked, but it was enough to make me aware that someone had opened them. The doors were solid, and I tested them out on several occasions, and no matter how hard I pulled, once they were latched, they would not open unless I turned the handles. To make matters worse, my dog Chester stopped going into the room at all. Even if I tried to force him in, he'd fight and struggle against me. The rest of the day, anywhere else, he was fine with me. It was only when I tried to get him to go into the bedroom that he fought me. And it started only after the closet doors started opening on their own in the night. This went on for about a month before my brother moved out on his own, and I jumped at the chance to move into his bedroom. I can't tell you how excited I was to get away from that bedroom and those closet doors, except now Chester was fine with my old room, but he wouldn't go into my new room. And dogs have instincts about these things, and I trusted Chester's instincts. The closet doors in the new room were solid wood. There were no louvers. And again, I tested them, and they could not be opened without turning the knobs. And it didn't stop them from opening on their own every night. No one believed me about the closed doors until my girlfriend, who would eventually become my wife, stayed over. She woke me up in the middle of the night frantically saying, "It's open. I just watched it open." Whatever followed me from one bedroom to the other at my father's house stayed there when I eventually moved out. And then I had my own place and it never happened again. I had another incident and it happened when I was 18, and it was an actual ghost sighting. I was driving to my friend's house in my 1994 Chevy pickup. And out of nowhere, my passenger seat headrest cover flew off and hit my windshield. At the same time, a ghostly figure of a woman appeared in the crosswalk directly in front of me. She had no feet, but she was wearing a dress and was completely white, and I could see right through her. So I slammed on my brakes, and then she was gone. It was a long time before anything strange happened to me again, but lately I've had an ongoing experience that I don't know what to do about it. We have 3 kids who all sleep upstairs, and my wife often works from home. She tells me that she hears footsteps upstairs when the kids are all at school, and I have to admit that I've heard them too. It isn't your typical house creaks and groans. It sounds like a grown man walking from room to room. And on top of this, on most nights, my kids will come downstairs because they claim they can hear someone breathing up there. Well, I hate telling my kids that there's nothing to be afraid of, but I don't want them to be scared. But I have seen things, so for me to say that would be lying to them. I'm a 31-year-old Army veteran, and I'm an avid hunter and fisherman. I walk around in the woods at night for fun with no fear at all. But when I think about what's going on in my house, the hairs start standing up all over my body and I get a cold feeling in the pit of my stomach. Some things in this world can't be explained, and they should not be messed with. All right, I appreciate you all listening and joining me on this podcast. I've been busy the last week. I've missed about 7 days of putting a podcast out because I've been working on other things, but I'm trying to get these done as quickly as possible and get a few done in a row so that I can upload those more consistently through the next few weeks. So there's no commentary. You don't get to hear me running my mouth, which is fine. I'll keep doing that at some point when I have time, but on this one it wasn't. I just wanted to read the stories so that you could enjoy them. And that'll do it for now, and I'll see you guys on the next podcast. I sure do appreciate you. Thank you.